What's scarier than a serial killer? A serial killer who was never caught. Someone who took multiple lives, left behind evidence, studied by investigators for years, and just walked away. Some of these cases are decades old. Some are still active investigations. And in at least one case, the killer was finally caught after hiding in plain sight for over a decade. But the rest? They could still be out there, living normal lives, maybe even watching videos like this one. Tonight, we're looking at 6 unsolved serial murder cases that still haunt investigators. Fair warning, this gets dark, but these stories are real. And they show us something terrifying. Sometimes the monster just gets away with it. Let's get into it. Case 1. The Zodiac Killer, California. December 20th, 1968. 2 teenagers are parked on a quiet road in Benicia, California. A car pulls up beside them. A man gets out, walks to their window, and without saying a word, opens fire. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen both die. The first confirmed victims of the killer who would become known as the Zodiac. Over the next year, he strikes again and again, shooting couples in parked cars, stabbing a man and woman at Lake Berryessa, shooting a cab driver in San Francisco. 5 confirmed dead, possibly more. But the murders weren't what made him infamous. It was the letters. Starting in August 1969, the Zodiac began sending encrypted messages to San Francisco newspapers. He included details only the killer would know. He taunted police. He threatened to blow up school buses. He signed his letters with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it. One letter began, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." In another, he claimed to have killed 37 people. Investigators could only confirm 5, but they couldn't rule out more. The Zodiac's ciphers became an obsession. Amateur codebreakers, professional cryptographers, and armchair detectives spent decades trying to crack them. Some were solved, others remain unbroken to this day. Police had suspects. Arthur Lee Allen was investigated for years. He matched the profile. He owned the same weapons. He lived near the crime scenes, but they could never prove it. Allen died in 1992, still a suspect, never charged. In 2021, a team of investigators claimed they'd identified the Zodiac using new forensic techniques and genealogy databases. But the case remains officially unsolved. No arrest was ever made. No trial ever happened. The Zodiac killer murdered at least 5 people, terrorized California, and mocked law enforcement for years. And he was never caught. Case 2. The Chicago Strangler, Illinois. Since 2001, at least 51 women have been murdered on Chicago's south and west sides. Most of them were black. Most were strangled. Most were found in abandoned buildings, dumpsters, or vacant lots. The victims were sex workers, women struggling with addiction, people society had already forgotten. And for over 20 years, the bodies just kept appearing. In 2019, a local reporter started connecting the dots. The patterns were undeniable. Similar victim profiles, same method of killing, geographic clustering. But Chicago police insisted there was no evidence of a single serial killer. They said these were isolated cases, different perpetrators. Community activists disagreed. Families of the victims disagreed. Retired detectives disagreed. Thomas Hargrove, founder of the Murder Accountability Project, analyzed the data and concluded there's likely at least one serial killer operating in Chicago, possibly more. Here's what makes this case so disturbing. These women disappeared and no one noticed. Or worse, people noticed and didn't care. No massive investigations, no press conferences, no FBI task forces, just bodies, piling up, year after year. If the Chicago Strangler exists, and the evidence suggests he does, he's still out there, still hunting, still killing women no one's looking for. And he knows it. Case 3. The Danilovsky Maniac, Russia. Moscow, 2004. An elderly woman answers a knock at her door. A man asks for a glass of water. She lets him in. Minutes later, she's dead. Beaten with a hammer. Robbed. Over the next 3 years, this happens at least 6 more times, possibly as many as 17. The victims were all elderly. All lived alone. All were attacked in their homes with blunt objects, usually hammers. The killer targeted the most vulnerable people in society. Those who couldn't fight back, those who lived in isolation. Russian police launched a massive investigation. They had sketches, witness descriptions, DNA evidence, but they never made an arrest. The attack stopped in 2007. Just stopped. Some investigators think the killer died. Others think he was imprisoned for something else. Some believe he simply moved to a different city and started over. The case remains unsolved. Somewhere, there's a man who murdered at least 7 elderly people in their own homes, and he was never caught. Case 4. Highway of Tears, Canada. There's a 450-mile stretch of highway in British Columbia, Canada, called Highway 16. Since the 1970s, at least 40 Indigenous women and girls have disappeared or been murdered along this road. Possibly more. No one knows the real number. The victims were hitchhiking, walking, waiting for buses, and they just vanished. Some bodies were found in the woods. Others were discovered in rivers. Many were never found at all. Investigators believe there are multiple killers, but they also believe at least one serial predator has been hunting along this highway for decades. Here's what makes this case so painful. For years, authorities did almost nothing. These were Indigenous women, poor, marginalized, invisible. Families begged for help. Communities protested. Activists demanded action. It took decades before the Royal Canadian Mounted Police finally launched a dedicated task force. By then, the trail was cold. Evidence was lost. Memories had faded. In 2012, Cody Legibokov was convicted of killing 3 women along the highway. But he couldn't have committed all the murders. He wasn't even born when some of the disappearances began. Someone else is still out there. And along Highway 16, Indigenous women are still going missing. Case 5. The West Mesa Bone Collector, New Mexico. February 2009. A woman is walking her dog on the West Mesa outside Albuquerque when the dog starts digging. It uncovers a human bone. Police are called. They start excavating. By the time they're finished, they've found the remains of 11 women and 1 unborn child. All the victims were buried in shallow graves. All had been killed between 2003 and 2005. Most were sex workers or women struggling with addiction. Investigators worked the case hard. They had DNA. They had timelines. They interviewed hundreds of people, but they never identified a suspect. In 2006, a local pimp named Lorenzo Montoya was killed by the boyfriend of a woman he was trying to abduct. Some investigators thought Montoya might be connected to the West Mesa murders, but the evidence didn't add up, and Montoya died before he could be questioned. The case went cold. Somewhere there's a man who killed at least 11 women, buried them in the desert, and walked away. He could still be in Albuquerque. He could be anywhere, and no one knows who he is. Case 6. The Eastbound Strangler, Atlantic City, New Jersey. November 2006. 4 women are found dead in Atlantic City within 4 months. All were strangled. All were left in drainage ditches behind motels. All were sex workers. The victims were Kim Raffo, Tracy Ann Roberts, Molly Jean Diltz, and Barbara Bredor. Investigators immediately suspected a serial killer. The pattern was too specific, too deliberate. But then, nothing. The murders just stopped. No more bodies, no more leads. Police had DNA evidence. They had witness reports of a man seen with some of the victims. They had a timeline, but they never made an arrest. Some detectives think the killer died. Others think he was arrested for something else and is sitting in prison right now for an unrelated crime. Or maybe he just moved, found a new hunting ground, started over somewhere else. The case remains open, technically active, but realistically cold. 4 women were murdered. Their killer was never caught. and no one knows why he stopped, or if he really stopped at all. Outro. So there you have it. 6 cases where serial killers either evaded justice completely or hid in plain sight for over a decade. Still out there, or dead, or in prison for something else entirely, biding their time. Here's what keeps investigators up at night. For every solved case, there are dozens that go cold. For every arrest, there are killers who just disappear. Some stop because they die. Some stop because they're imprisoned for other crimes. Some stop because they move. And some never stop at all. They just get better at hiding. If you made it this far, drop a comment. Which case disturbed you most? And if you want more dark history like this, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay dark.